Hey, what is up YouTube? Just wanted to do a video covering an update of where we're at so far, and then our build and how we've constructed it further, and lastly I'm going to be talking about my opinions on the current state of the game. So where we're at, so currently we finished all the tier 15 maps, and I guess we'll be XPing a little bit more, getting a bit more power level, and then trying to find the citadels. And from what we have seen, some of the endgame bosses have fairly manageable with 4 to 5 million HP. So with the current state of the gear that we have, I think I'm fairly comfortable in terms of offense to be able to eventually take it down in moderately fast fashion. And in terms of defenses, I am getting happy to where the build is at, but more on that later. So first and foremost, let's start with our gear. So currently what we are using, so I'll just go through the gear pieces one by one. So for our crossbow, we have not been able to get an upgrade since X6, so this is going to be one of my top priority to be able to get upgraded. As for my helmet, currently we're still using the Radiant Greave. If you haven't checked out the previous video, that's where I talked about the one button interaction using Radiant Greave. But I imagine that I'll be switching this out on the pinnacle bosses, as this merely adds a quality of life enhancement to the one button playstyle. Next is going to be our newest addition to the build and how we constructed the main core defensive layer for our physical mitigation, and that is the Cloak of Flame, which PoE 1 players will be very familiar with as a very strong way to be able to deal with physical damage. Next is going to be the amulet, which is life resist, but I do definitely want to get this upgraded. I currently have it anointed with infused flesh, which provides some form of recovery, which I found the build was lacking. And this anoint is very cheap, using greed and 2 MVs, which I think should cost you under 2 exalts to be able to anoint. Otherwise, a very good defensive enchantment given the medium core nature of PoE 2. Next is going to be rings, nothing too special here. Things you're going to be looking out for is going to be life and resist. Any physical damage to attacks or fire damage to attacks would be a plus, and same for the other ring. Next is going to be the glove, nothing too special here, just life, resist, and any forms of physical or fire damage would be a plus to the build. For the boots, it's going to be slightly more difficult to acquire, and that's going to be life, resist, and movement speed, and pretty much any other modifiers like stats, life, regen. I mean, that's all going to be a nice addition. Last but not least is going to be the belt, life, resist, nothing too special here. As for my flask, this is going to be fairly important for recovery, and that's going to be ultimate life flask and ultimate mana flask, the best flask bases. And what you want to get is a suffix which gives you gain charges per second. The highest roll you can get is 0.25, and any flask above level 46 I think should be able to give you up to the second highest tier of recovery, which is where we want to be. And then the highest tier of recovery is at level I think 81 or something, so that's pretty unrealistic, and I don't think it's going to be necessary to be able to push all the way just to get additional 10% recovery. Apart from that, you want to get the same thing on your mana flask, 0.25, so I'm going to work on that next to be able to get the charges per second to be able to deal with encounters that are longer lasting. You can gain more charges over time, and it kind of adds a lot. So essentially moving from 0.2 to 0.25, it's pretty much 25% more charges gained, so that will be pretty good. Lastly is going to be my charms. I'm not rest capped yet for chaos rest, so that's where I'm still using the amethyst charm to be able to deal with chaos damage in maps, which is some damage that you're going to take a lot, which you find that you're going to be dying to, especially in the higher tier maps. The chaos damage hits for a lot. Some things I've explored previously, going through my gems first, is going to be gas grenade with the 6 link. So my setup I think has not changed since the previous time. That's going to be gas grenade linked to scattershot, fire penetration, immolate, inspiration, and fire infusion. So there are a lot of questions around which links you should use, and the most common one is going to be payload, which I think is actually bad gem to use. We are using that with flash grenade right now, but it's very, very bad because it reduces your cooldown recovery rate. It actually takes longer for your gas grenade to cool down, which means that after you finish all your gas grenades, you actually don't recharge it back as fast as you see over here. And with enough attack speed, our grenade actually goes down to 0, and that's where we'll be rotating to other skills to use. And if you use payload, that duration just is going to get longer, so that's not good for the build. Next up, we are keeping explosive grenade because if monsters are far away, that's where we will detonate the grenades from afar. You don't walk up to every single monster to kill them, even though we're breeding grief. If the monsters are far away, essentially this is how I played before I got the helmet. So if, let's say, this map splits into two ways, if the monsters are there and this is the main road, I essentially would just gas grenade, explosive grenade, and then move on. And then the explosive grenade would detonate the gas grenade, even though we are more than 6 meters away from the monster. So that's why we're keeping explosive grenade in there. And we are linking it to fast forward for it to explode just that little bit faster. Next is going to be our staple of bread and butter, the flash grenade. So when you have fast monsters in maps, mana siphoners, hasted monsters, monsters that you don't want to be chasing you down and hitting you or attacking you, that is where you'll be using the flash grenade, linked to overpower for more stun, devastate to armor break for a little bit more damage on cluster grenade, and payload to be able to activate a second time. And that's where we can build up the stun a lot faster. Next is going to be all grenade, and that's going to be our bread and butter for single target, and that's where we will lay it down on bosses and then ignite it and then throw all your gas grenades on top of that. So that is what gas grenade, all grenade is for, and we are linking that to increase AoE with magnified effect, persistence for longer duration, and strip away for 26% exposure on top of the baseline 20, so this adds an additional 6%. Next up is going to be cluster grenade. So we went ahead to 6-link this to increase our single target damage to supplement during the time when our gas grenade is on cooldown. Where we have finished using all our gas grenades, that's where we will be laying it in. You can see that we have no more gas grenades. We are waiting, standing and waiting. So during the time, instead of standing and waiting for the gas grenade to cool down, that is where we'll be replacing all grenades, cluster grenades, and throwing all your buffs in, flash grenades for stun, and then go back to gassing the boss. So this 6-link cluster grenade essentially will add some supplementary damage on top of that, and we want to get this out of the way as fast as possible, and here's how we do it. So cluster grenade is linked to execute, so when the boss is on lower life, he takes more damage, which is very good. Next is going to be ingenuity to lower the cooldown of cluster grenade to make it cool down in about 4 seconds. Next is primal armaments to increase the damage of the cluster grenade further, and then concentrated effect for that more 40% area damage while reducing the area of effect, which is fine because we use it for a pure single target scenario, but our gas grenade is generally for clearing and spamming. Lastly, it's going to be a design choice, which is martial tempo. Does not add any damage, but just shoot it out faster so we can get moving on to casting your other skills as ASAP. So you can feel like without martial tempo, it's going to be 0.56 attack time. With it, it's 0.45, so we can just get it out of the way much quicker. And you can feel the difference the moment you put on the faster attacks. Next is going to be something that I just added, and that's going to be a Voltaic grenade. I was testing it out, and it is very good with these 4 links to be able to build up in maps, electrocute, as well as shock on a monster. So essentially, when you have a difficult to fight rare or a pack, that's where you'll be throwing Voltaic grenade. What I do recommend is throwing all 3 out at once to kind of increase that chance of electrocuting the enemy, and Voltaic grenade is very good at building that up. And with enough lightning damage, you can shock, and here's how I've linked the gems. Number 1, lightning infusion to increase your lightning damage, increasing your chance to shock, as well as electrocute. And then next is conduction to be able to increase your chance to shock even further, and then lightning mastery to increase the damage of Voltaic grenade. What I found is that by testing this, the other support gems, which increase the shock duration but reduce the damage and reduce the shock chance, was not good at proccing shocks and electrocute as well. So what I've done is instead use a lightning mastery gem to increase the damage of the gem a little bit further. So that is the setup I'm currently using to be able to apply shock and electrocute on monsters, which is a very good setup to increase your damage more. If you guys didn't know, shock is a more multiplier applied to the monster, which means that whatever your final damage is you're dealing, let's say 200,000 damage, it is then multiplied by 1.2 times. It is 20% shock. So it is a very big multiplier to the build. Lastly, it's going to be our aura setup. We have dropped Defiance banner. I find myself not really casting it too much in maps, so I've decided to add in a sustain link, which I found to be losing life in maps through damage over time and things like that. To deal with chip damage in maps, I've added in the new link called cannibalism to recover life on kill. This is in no way good for dealing with bosses because this is completely useless, but for mapping, I think it's really good. For bossing, I'd imagine we'll be using something like the attrition aura gem. But currently, Winddancer is linked to clarity gem for mana regen, very important. Vitality, very important as well for life regen. Cannibalism, which we talked about earlier, and precision to be able to give you the accuracy. This is super important because without the precision gem, you can see that in your gas grenade, for example, my accuracy is not capped. Estimated main hand chance to hit 94%, and you really want it to be 100%. And that's why we are using precision on top of that. As an update to the passive tree, before I jump into the defensive shell of the build, I'm pathing slightly differently. I removed the armor and evasion nodes. I've gone through hard to kill, get a bit more recovery. And then the nodes here are all the same. The difference is that we are going to be skipping heat proofing and beef and going into prism guard to build up that max resist, and pathing to catalysis to be able to get that increased Phys damage taken as random element alongside the elemental damage of attacks, and getting the jewel socket. So dropping these expensive heavy pathing over here allows us to get more maximum resist, which rounds out the build very nicely when pairing with our defensive shell. So let me just talk about it really quickly. So damage in maps comes from a few main ways, and that is number one, physical damage that you take, elemental damage that you take, chaos damage that you take, as well as damage over time that you take. And this could be through a few different elements, either chaos or the elements or physical. And dealing with physical mitigation is done very well through the Cloak of Flame, which PoE1 players will be very familiar with, and that is converting 40% of physical damage to fire. So for those of you who don't know how this works, essentially what's going to happen is that if you take a hit of 1,000 physical damage, for 40% of that, which is 400 damage out of that 1000, is converted into fire and then reduced by your fire resist, in which my case it's 87%. So significantly reducing the damage with this one chest without needing to invest into physical damage mitigation, which is diminishing returns and when the hit gets larger. Whereas this is a flat outright conversion to fire and reduction through resistance. So this is very good in dealing with physical damage. Secondly, it's going to be elemental mitigation, and we are solving that through, as you would have guessed, maximum resistances. And our main ways of getting maximum resist is going to be unnatural resilience, which pairs very well with the conversion with Fist of Fire, as you would have seen, giving you resistances. Essentially how this works is if your number in brackets is 40, you get +2 max res. If the number in brackets is 80, you get +4% max res. And if your number in brackets is 120, you get 6% fire max resist. So that's where we get 6 resist on max fire and 1 additional here, 7, and then 8 from here, and then up to 10% max fire res from these over here. So just on the tree alone and the resistances that we have, we get 10% max fire on top of jewels that you can get to be able to give you maximum resistances. Where is it? Like this one, for example, giving you +2 max fire res. This is going to be very good at building a defensive shell where you can add in these jewels into your build. And that brings us to elemental mitigation numbers of very good layers of 87% fire, 79 coal, and 83 lightning currently. If you have lower levels, you won't be able to take these. So just keep in mind that these max res nodes will come later, but they are very powerful in building your elemental mitigation. And next is going to be chaos mitigation, which is built through chaos resistances, and you would have seen some of my gear pieces earlier. It's using the soul of Tacati to be able to give you a chaos resistance on your gear to be able to shore that up further. But you do want to take note that your Cloak of Flame, you will need to gear around the only fire res being gotten on your Cloak of Flame, and I've gone ahead to be able to add in the soul of Tacati into the chest as well. And you would have seen an additional implicit roll, and that is from valing an item to be able to have a chance at giving you an implicit, and I've luckily hit chaos resistance. But in the future, if I were to get chaos resistance in other gear, that is where we can swap for a better implicit potentially. But that's currently where we're at, and we are not chaos res cap, and we are shoring that up further with the amethyst charm to be able to get additional chaos resist. So in maps generally we are fairly resistance and chaos res cap currently. As for damage over time, I did mention this earlier briefly when talking about the anointment, but what I found was that taking a lot of chip damage, and that is where I started opting for cannibalism in maps to be able to recover that a little bit better, as well as the life regeneration from tree through these 3 points,
hard to kill, and then anointing the infused flesh for some of the damage taken to be recouped, and this is generic damage, not just physical damage or elemental damage taken recouped. So this is generic, any kind of damage you take, you'll regen that back, so that deals with the chip damage over time, a little bit better in maps. As you lose the HP, you kind of gain it back as you kill monsters, stand around, or just recoup it back. And what I noticed to round off the passive tree is lastly the Ascendency, which is no change from where we got previously, and then the jewel sockets. So what I think is going to be the endgame shell of a lot of Path of Exile 2 builds is going to be jewels. Jewels are extremely strong, providing up to 4 affixes. Giving you 4 beneficial affixes is massive, especially given that a lot of jewel sockets of wherever you're pathing right now, you can access between 1 to 3 passive points, giving you a significant amount of power as compared to potentially notables in your area, which you would have taken already the best ones, leaving you with the best options to be taking jewels. You can see over here, I have 1-point jewel socket, I have 3-point jewel socket, not very visible over here, but 1, 2, 3, and then here's like another 4 points away, 1, 2, 3, 4, you know, to get to jewel sockets, which provide significant amount of power. An example is going to be this: movement speed, accuracy, projectile damage, attack speed, or defensive layers like this one, providing you charm charges, max resistances, and more damage or attack speed, whatever you need for your build. So these are some of the examples of modifiers that I'm looking for. You can also opt for things like fire penetration, but just keep in mind that the different jewels roll different modifiers, so you kind of want to search for different ones to provide you different benefits if you don't want to stack up all into fire. If I want a more balance, I would need to use a sapphire jewel, for example, to get max cold resistances, which is something I'm going to look for next. And with that, the Ascendency choices in order would be Khal through Pitiless Killer, Drudgery Executioner, I forgot to cover that earlier, and then Zealous Inquisition with the Explode. Currently, Uberlab is bugged from what I hear through Ultimatum and Sanctum, so that is not possible yet, but I imagine my endgame boss setup will look like taking the Concentration over here, or potentially specking to Decimation, and then taking that out for when I log out of the boss room. So that could be something I'll be looking out for. In terms of gear upgrades, wherever we add, it's going to be an upgraded bow. We got this in Act 6 and have not upgraded that since, so this is going to be at the top of my priority to increase my damage a little bit further. I'm planning to get a little bit more Chaos Rest to pretty much have a new charm or change of gear to be able to make use of better implicits or socketed what do you call that, soul cores, to be able to give different benefits to the build, and then projectile gems on the amulet will be very huge in increasing my damage, but keep in mind that the gem levels increase your mana cost as well. 2 other things I want to talk about is going to be the gems, and I've explored various things. Voltaic Grenade is the only one that's stuck, but essentially I tried out Ripwire Ballista alongside Font of Rage to be able to generate Rage, which gives you 1% more attack damage per Rage, up to I think 20 or 50, I can't remember how high it goes up to, but what I found was that it degens exceptionally quickly, that it just ends up losing DPS if you want to actually try to build it up, and kind of fix you in a specific location around the totem to be able to generate Rage, so that's not good. And also I've decided to settle on Winddancer and dropping Defiance Banner as my choice, because I find that dropping Defiance Banner is very clunky in the fight, as well as you don't really have it a lot of the time, so I decided to just drop it and put in the recovery for mapping instead. And that covers pretty much my passive tree, my gear, my defensive shell, and pretty much going a little bit more in depth into that is going to be talking about the state of the game. So currently what I find through mapping all the way to tier 15s, and I've been doing that for quite a while, getting to almost level 90 right now, is going to be the damage that you take in maps. And currently with a south side tree, you don't really have access to a lot of the defensive layers that ES builds have. And that is going to be the hit pool, and I think a balance between the top side tree and the bottom side tree. You see a lot of different streamers out there using ES builds with 7 to 10,000 energy shield, but for south side tree we are extremely limited. I can imagine that our top end of life could go up to 3,000 at best. So that is not very good as compared to the 10,000 life. So essentially what this means, to put it into perspective, is that without any evasion, armor, max res, an ES build can take 10,000 damage, but for us at 2.5k HP, for example, we will need to increase our mitigation by over 4 times to be able to survive the same amount of damage that an ES build can take. And that is tremendously difficult and a lot of investment to take to be able to reach the same state as these ES builds. Other things that I noticed is the overtuned levels of chaos damage. So I think Snap was also talking about it. Their group is facing a lot of chaos damage and dying to those, and it feels like the chaos damage is really overtuned. And there's also a lot of on-death mechanics that may not be as visible, especially with all the things going on, the layout, all the effects that are being thrown out. Sometimes visual clarity can be a big problem. And lastly, it's a skill issue, but there's just a lack of knowledge of monsters in Path of Exile 2. But slowly over time, we are being able to identify that, okay, this is a detonate monster with that little big club and that big body. He's gonna explode after we kill him. So yeah, we're slowly learning various different monster types and the kind of detrimental effects that they can do after their death, when they're alive. You know, there's so many different things that we need to take into account, but slowly we'll learn that over time. In terms of crafting, it is really cool. In terms of the Varlock crafting, being able to increase the power level of your build. If I were rich, I would be valuing my Radiant Grief helmet, but currently we're poorer, but so we're going to try to make some currency to upgrade our gear, our crossbow. But I found the Val Orbing very cool, giving you very random outcomes. When the crafting bench is gone, it's actually very difficult to be able to resist cap, and that is the struggle that I think you will be facing and what I faced in the first few days of mapping. Even when I reached raid map, my resistance was not capped. It is possible, but you will die at some points. So that's my thoughts on crafting. And in terms of some closing ideas that I have that I mentioned earlier is adding, when I get to the pinnacle boss in the next few days, that's going to be taking Decimating Strike at the initial and maybe logging out and switching that over to the concentration wheel potentially, and then using the attrition aura to be able to for Cull, since we dropped Pitiless Killer. And then with that Cull, it allows us to be able to cull the boss without taking these 4 Ascendency nodes. Since we already benefit from the first hit of Decimating Strike, we can now go into concentration to add the more damage, potentially. But of course, that is just some ideas that I'm coming with. So that's what I wanted to share today. If you liked the video, feel free to like, share, and subscribe, and do catch me on stream because I'll be streaming the next few days, and you can see how the build feels, looks, and plays. And if you're already rolling this, hope you have a great time rolling. And if you go past level 80 and want to transition to the Cloak of Flame build, do feel free to follow my build. I think it is fairly tanky, but you will still die once in a while until you learn all the mechanics and maps, you know, move well. So just something to keep in mind. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one. Bye.